What's going on, everybody? Welcome back. Thank you for checking out this episode of the Keep Klimbing podcast. Back in the studio today and starting to get into a little bit of a rhythm. I know I talked about in the previous episode. We're traveling all over the place and doing a ton of player assessments, ton of player evaluations right now. A ton of players in our facilities, a ton of players at the colleges, that we support. The professional seasons are coming to a close or winding down. We're going to start kind of getting into some of those too. I wanted to spend some time today really talking about September and really early off-season player goals and objectives. With it being kind of a relevant time frame of the year, it's going to be really similar, I guess, for a lot of the different demographics of players. There's obviously some differences in the schedules for youth players to high school players to college players to professional players. But there's also a lot of really, a lot of similarities, and in September, what I think is really unique about the time frame, in September is that really outside of your junior college players, everybody is kind of in more of an off-season mode. Certainly, like in college, they're playing a lot more scrimmages. They're doing different things like that. But they take like a hybrid-like schedule where they're still really trying to accomplish some developmental needs versus competitive needs. But I think that's the main point to kind of lead in with here is if you're the player, regardless of your demographic, regardless of your age, understanding kind of what your competitive schedule looks like versus your training schedule throughout like the whole course of the year, right? And so where this could start to vary for people, I guess, is like what your fall schedule, game schedule, throwing schedule, and those things sort of look like. I think at the end of the day, everything that we do in this calendar month of the year as a baseball player and through the next month or two really has to support us peaking, in February or March or whenever the season starts the next year, and I think, the first thing that you have to evaluate as a player, as a coach, as a parent of a player is understanding kind of like what that schedule looks like for you, what it looks like for the last 6 months and what you're coming off of, excuse me. And then the next 6 months of what you're going to be kind of going into, understanding what's going to be expected of you, understanding events or showcases that you need to attend to, continue to get opportunities that you're seeking, and then what type of call-ups, send-downs, opportunities you may get in professional baseball. Obviously, having to be ready for Major League spring training is far different than having to be ready for a minor league spring training. The timing of those things are all a little bit different. So understanding kind of those schedules for you, I think, is where this entire thing starts. There's a really large percentage, I would say the biggest percentage of people right now, are either done with, coming off of, winding down from their competitive schedule off of the spring and the summer. There's a large population of people certainly that are playing fall or more active with their competitive schedule throughout the fall. But understanding kind of where you're at in that big picture, I think, is really going to help establish the course of direction on where you go for the next couple of months. But the main thing I really wanted to talk about today is, like what type of needs players have going in through the months of September, October, and November. Some of the thoughts and considerations that we as coaches have, the players certainly should be having, and maybe a little bit behind the curtain on like what's going into some of those thoughts and conversations. But as far as the next couple months ahead of us goes, and really the main point for today, I think, is understanding like strength and capacity needs and concerns for players, right? So to kind of zoom out and look at the overall like schedule, right? Over the past couple months, the gameplay volume has been extremely high, and really the training volume has been as high as it can be to still support on-field performance, right? If we're doing anything in the gym or in the on the practice mound or anything like that jeopardizes our ability to be healthy or perform at our best, during those calendar months of the year, we're doing something wrong. Okay. But we're getting into a time frame of the off season where we don't have those types of demands for the sport on the field. So what can I be doing with these months to set myself up for the most amount of success going into the next competitive season? And we look at all these things and we call them like developmental windows, right? We're in a big time developmental window right now for the biggest percentage population of people. And I think that, one of the main things that people look at kind of going in through this, especially the younger demographics, the way they see their own training, the way they see our business, is thinking that they want to get in, evaluate, and see and understand and improve their mechanics. And while that certainly can be the case, and certainly is the case for a lot of people, I think a lot of the gaps that could be in that is not understanding the overall system that's around that, the support or build a player's mechanics, right? So over these next couple of months, these are the cleanest months we have ahead of us to really focus in on strength, capacity, movement, capacity, and concerns for players, that everybody comes in wanting to improve their velocity, improve their pitch movement, improve their ability to throw strikes, improve their ability to go deeper into games, and all those different sort of things. And really what I think could be glanced over by a lot of people is what type of strength and mobility capacities they have to support those things. Okay, so like I said, September, October, November, extremely critical months for player development. I think that the lens that you look at that through is totally different during a competitive schedule versus during a training schedule. And the analogy I like to give a lot of people is the battery percentage on your phone, right? If we've only got 100% of energy to give, on a certain day, within a certain week, within a certain month, that as that battery percentage is consumed less by competitive schedule, then typically the training schedule kind of absorbs more of that. And what I think a common flaw of people, what people do is, they kind of, get done with their season. A lot of it's like really cold turkey, like last game of the year, like, okay, we're done with baseball season. And they get into some of those months and they'll start kind of, some time will go by, and it's different, for everybody for sure. Like, and some people are really quick to get back in the gym or start throwing. Some people kind of, play other sports or do other things throughout the fall, which I totally agree with. Totally, I would do all that when I was a kid as well. And doing what I do now, I really see and understand how critical some of those months are to build the base of the platform for the coming year's successes. Okay. And a lot of people, like I said, kind of come into looking at training, looking at the programs that we build. They want to improve their pitching mechanics, they want to improve their velocity or whatever. And one thing we really try to drive home with all of our athletes is how important these next couple of months, as the game volume is low, the competitive volume is low, are the cleanest months that you have as a baseball player to really focus on some of those things. That in the reality, 90 days, 3 months is such a small window to affect any sort of change within your body, within your joints, within your ligaments, within it's a very small window. So those months to really set that base become extremely critical, because as we start to get into December and January and February, the skill training, whether it's throwing a ball, swinging a bat, that volume really starts to pick back up. And just the nature of our sport, the nature of the game, is all that stuff has to take precedent over what your strength and conditioning, what your other programs kind of look like, because we've only got so much energy to kind of give within a day, right? Go back to my battery analogy there. If we've got 100% of energy to give, how much of that energy is spent in the weight room, on the mound, in the batter's box, maybe at school, maybe at football practice, maybe at whatever extracurriculars you have going on outside of that training schedule? That's all going into the sum of that 100% of your battery. And I think that's a really, really important thing to consider in all of this, is because there are so many other things that we have going on a day-to-day basis. It could be a test week. It could be, homework. It could be work, like if you've got a job outside of any of this, and like what that does to your overall central nervous system, your ability to compete and perform and train. That understanding that these next couple of months that we have ahead of us are some of the best, the most clean months that we have, where the competitive schedule is and the volume is so low that we have time to fill more of these strength and movement buckets. And that's really what we should be trying to do through September, October, and November. And I think that, people lose sight. We say this kind of phrase all the time, that mechanics is an expression of, how your body's put together and what your strength and movement capacities are. So we've got the ability now to expand on those capacities with over the next like 3 or 4 months that, by doing those things, those are some of the things that are actually within your mechanics or your velocities or whatever your goals may be as a player. um, that's the time frame that you have to focus the most on those things that ultimately are going to help you take some of the biggest strides forward. Like we're doing all these assessments and player evaluations right now in these days, and that is some of the most consistent needs that we see across the board, really for every player, every demographic, from youth all the way to pro. But especially as the player demographic or the ages are lower, the younger players, those strength needs are usually the things that are the most obvious, or the biggest things that are the lowest hanging fruit, or the biggest deficiencies, if you will, for those players. And a lot of that, like there's some of it you don't want to rush. There's some of it that you definitely want to consider. The biological age of the player, overall maturity and puberty, and how all of those things, kind of play into this is to not be in such a big rush for developing a velocity or certain things like that. But the overall strength needs is the biggest thing that we see that players need. And so these next couple of months, knowing like what those needs really are, these months are super critical for a lot of players, and especially a lot of young players, right? So I think knowing that first and foremost really helps maybe shift our mind and our brain, and frame our mind and brain on what needs to happen, and kind of looking at it. The way I've kind of got it broken down here is looking at it in kind of 3-month chunks. If you're looking at these next 3 months of having some really good strength goals, capacity goals, right? Force development goals, and then the 3 months after that being December, January, February, and kind of looking at that through like throwing needs and goals. It's a pretty good way, probably overgeneralized still, to maybe compartmentalize the off season a little bit. But all of the force plate testing that we do, all of the table assessments, mobility, range of motion assessments that we do, some of the biggest needs that we see with these players are on the strength capacity. And some of the normal like breakdowns or rabbit holes, if you will, that we can go down is giving mechanical cues to maybe movement or strength issues, right? And so we're trying to evaluate that for players. We're trying to evaluate their mechanics. We're trying to evaluate their capacities, and a lot of common flaws that you'll see, that we see, on a day-to-day, year-to-year type of basis with players, is that you can manipulate, and you can try to compensate your mechanics to generate a little bit more force with the capacity that you currently have. But I think something really good to consider is like at what cost. Like you get players that get in like really deep loading strategies. You get players that like try to get like way more in their back hip, or tilt their shoulders like way more, and they're trying to just like load the rubber band. They're trying to load way better, and they get into some of these such like deep patterns that it's really hard for them to get out of. And sure, you might get a bump or two in like velocity, but at what cost, right? Like if I'm not able to execute my pitch, if my command becomes like really subject to generate that type of force, then it's really not going to produce the success for you on the field that you're looking at. And while you can do that, you can start to do some of those things and maybe see a couple of mile an hour increase or whatever have you, considering the big picture cost that's in that for everybody. I think is really important, because in the opposite, what you could or should do is understanding where you're at from a mechanical standpoint, and understanding like what your needs are within that, and certainly coming up with some objectives to either understand what you do well and continue to do that well, understand what you don't do well, and get yourself in some drill environments, or understanding like what you could or should be doing better within your mechanics is certainly important. But if you just took it, in a hypothetical scenario, and you had a player who did all these like excessive loading strategies or whatever have you, mechanical strategies to improve their velocity, and you took another player who had pretty clean mechanics, fine mechanics, and you actually went in a route where you just helped that player create more capacity in their movement and mobility capacities and their strength and force development capacities, and you kept their mechanics exactly the same and what felt natural to them. That player that is building the strength and capacity not only could and would still gain those the mile an hour, the velocity goals that they're seeking, but you're also never going to have these issues on down the road of execution issues, or even having to then recorrect mechanics that got you to a certain velocity threshold, but now you have the strength or movement capacities to actually generate those with a little bit simpler, easier to repeat, quote unquote better mechanics, that you'll see in that second scenario. The player never has to then backtrack and then maybe correct mechanical issues that is now keeping them from executing and ultimately throwing strikes to get the outs that they're desiring when they're on the field. So I think that's a very common, especially in today's pitching training atmosphere, and the way that our game is so velocity driven, and it is, and it's not going away. It's only getting more so. But that starvation, or the starving feeling that players and parents and families and kids feel to improve their velocity, I think really needs to be looked at through the lens of, well, why don't we try improving your force production, your strength capacity, your movement capacity first, right? And so these next couple months that we have, that's the time frame really to be doing that. You're certainly going to look to build on top of that come December, January, and February, and on from there. But I think the main point of the topic today is that these next 3 months that we have is really the only time throughout the entire year that a baseball player has to just solely focus on improving those things, instead of trying to overcompensate with mechanical and movement strategies to execute, or sorry, to like get those goals or achieve those goals that they're seeking. And what I think far too many people do is glance right over this time frame, maybe not take the weight room as seriously, maybe not take their movement and corrective exercises as seriously, and they want to jump right to the mechanics conversations, the pitch design conversations, the sequencing or tunneling or execution conversations that take place more so in December, January, and February as they're prepping for the season. Like the next three months that we have really is building the entire foundation for success that an athlete wants to have, for the 2026 season. And I think that by really focusing on, like what areas do I need to improve on? Are there things in my mechanics I do need to improve on? And certainly, I don't want anybody to hear this and think that like, oh, well, Brett's saying the mechanics don't matter, just go get like stronger in the weight room. That's certainly not the case. The flow of energy when you're on the mound, even when you have like really high strength capacities or force development, those things are obviously certainly very important, to produce, a healthy, effective, hard throwing pitcher. And that's what everybody's trying to do and trying to achieve. But it's these next couple months that we have in front of us where we can very cleanly put together a program for athletes to not only just generally build their strength capacities, but very specifically in which type of areas. And in all of our assessments, we're really trying to get very specific what those things are. They could be they could be lower body goals, they could be trunk or core goals, they could be upper body goals. And I think all of those different things are so very critical. All of those things are put together to that go into the pitching mechanics or the biomechanics and the way that an athlete moves down the mound. So, in doing that and evaluating that for players, what we're trying to do is establish a very specific course of direction for them. And the younger the player is, the lower the training is, the lower the strength and movement capacities are, um, those goals can be very simplified, right? Like those goals can be very simplified. But then as training age, as capacities increase, as certain areas of capacities increase, like we had an example with a college player this summer. This is a kid that played in the SEC this past year, and he came to our facility, and big, strong kid, been playing college baseball for a long time, had some success, and certainly has some areas that he wants to improve on. But even with him, we're seeing a lack of upper body force capacity. That was the main like capacity goal for him throughout the summer. During that kind of like developmental window for a college player, that even for a player that's 22, 23 years old, there's still some capacity needs that all these players have, and there could be so many different things that affect that, right? Like you could build the general strength and capacity that you need to be successful, experience a time frame where that diminishes, whether it be because of lack of a program, whether it be because of an injury, whether it be because like you're really over focused in a different area, that some of the things just kind of get lost in the shuffle, and that happens for players, but like that's why I think it's so important this time of year, coming off of a competitive schedule, going into more of a training schedule, development schedule, if you will, to reevaluate where all of those metrics are for you, to help build that overall big picture, get all the puzzle pieces basically in the right area going into the next competitive season. That once you do one assessment, certainly you can see tendencies and things that the way you move, the way that an individual moves, the way a certain player moves. But the importance of like assessing and reassessing is there's ebbs and flows, there's peaks and valleys, and all of these things, and continually getting data, information, video, feedback, all of these things on these data points essentially that we're collecting. That's ultimately what our coaches are trying to help all of our players do, is understand where they're at, understand where they're trying to go, build a plan for where they're at, where they're trying to go, to build them up in the healthiest way possible, to build them up in the strongest way possible, to build them up with accomplishing their goals throughout that development window that they're seeking, whether it's velocity, whether it's adding or improving a pitch, whether it's sustaining success, whether it's longevity and maybe making it deeper in the game, maybe it's a role change. A lot of these things, there's a lot of different like areas, I guess, that you could constitute as success or wins, for players, or goals that they may have. So these next couple months, things that I'd encourage you with, if you're listening to this, assess where you're at, assess where you've been, the things that you've done this past year, goals that you have for the coming, competitive season or cycle, opportunities that you're seeking, looking into the people that are getting those opportunities. What are their data points? What are their, statistics? What are their outcomes? What do all those things look like? Put yourself side by side, and you'll start to see, areas that you'll really need to improve on. And essentially that's what all of our assessments are designed to do. All of our assessments that we take, in a range of motion standpoint, from a biomechanical standpoint, from a pitch quality standpoint, and from a strength and conditioning or performance standpoint, are all stacked beside what we'd call high performing throwers, guys that throw hard, guys that throw strikes, guys that stay healthy. And, all three of those main areas kind of going into what we would create or call optimal ranges. And then we take the players' data that we're assessing there, stack them up against that, and start to see where, some areas are lower, definitely start to see where some areas are higher in strengths that the player has, and then building plans and programs to help them do what they do well, close the gaps on the things they don't do well, and ultimately get them going in a direction going into their competitive season in March and so on, to continue to build on top of that, produce the success and achieve their goals that they're looking to achieve. And then then it kind of starts all over again. We were talking in a facility the other day, and we were talking about, we were joking, talking about like the starting line, like where's the finish line? Where's the starting line? And truthfully, like, the starting line right now, obviously, like we're assessing, we're getting started throughout the off season. But I also think it's probably, a bad way to look at it, that March 1st or whenever your season starts to be the finish line. because if that's the finish line and then the training kind of falls off the rails there, and we get into such a gameplay competition mode, you're going to see like, diminishing performance throughout that time frame. And most of these seasons, you may not see it just in through the spring season because it's a little bit shorter. You may not see it just in like with a month or whatever, because you can sustain a lot of those strength gains, mobility gains, or whatever that you had through that shorter duration of time. But they'll certainly show up in through the end of the spring and into the summer and into these next training cycles that you have. That ultimately what you're trying to do as a player, is like you're going to have peaks and valleys in your growth and in your training and in your development. It's not going to be a straight linear line. But hopefully, you're building some compound, interest that as you keep going through this, that, there really is no finish line. I guess that's what the joke was, is that like we're at the starting line here and we're trying to get them to March 1st, but then it kind of restarts and starts back over and you're back at the starting line, and then you go through your spring season and you got your start line, and, the state championship might be a very human nature, look at to say, well, that's the finish line. Well, then it starts right back over and you're into your summer cycle and you're back at the starting line, and then you go in through high school and you get your opportunity to go play college baseball and you're right back at the starting line, and so every year just kind of like starts back over like that. And at the beginning of that cycle should always be a time where you're reflecting and assessing where you're at, where you want to go, building a plan for what you want to do to get you to your next goals, whether that be performance-driven goals, whether that be on-field outcomes, statistical goals, whether that be team accomplishment type of goals. And it just kind of restarts. It just restarts. So there's really it's human nature for all of us to kind of view the starting line to have a finish line. But truthfully, it doesn't. Like you're at the starting line here now, and you might have a finish line in mind on when the training cycle of this is going to end and the competition is going to take over. But then you're right back at the starting line of that competitive cycle. So kind of understanding that from the get-go, I think is really important and a really good lens, I guess, to view all these things through. So I think the overall like thought process here is looking at September, October, and November as a really good opportunity early on in off season for players to build the foundation, have the time frame throughout the year where competition volume is the lowest, and have an opportunity to really assess and evaluate what type of strength, movement, capacity goals that I need to accomplish within these next few months, right? Month to month, every 3 months, like I said, is usually a good way to view it. But what type of goals can I have in through there? And like I said at the beginning, I think a very common flaw or way of thinking about this for players is that they kind of get in through this and they're wanting a little bit of a mental break. And I certainly can attest to that. And I know what that feels like. But the people that are going to continue to go on, continue to be successful, continue to have the success next spring, and then even the spring after that, and the year after that, and the year after that, are going to be the people who can really evaluate where they're at, build a really good plan with people and resources and mentors and coaches and people around them to help them get them to those goals. That a lot of those things that you're wanting to accomplish next February, March, April, and throughout the entire year is going to come down to what you do, in these next couple of months that too many people want to glance right over and go right past, and they just kind of view strength training, especially, I think strength training probably gets the biggest knock, out of anything of what we do. And it's probably the most important thing that we do. I'm going to take the probably out of that. Actually, I think it's certainly the most important thing that we do, because it's the foundation of what everything you want to do. It's the foundation of your house that you want to build everything on top of to accomplish, in those months that you're looking to, throw really hard at your showcase in February, or throw really hard and get the guys out, in your early season, spring training type of games to get you into better opportunities in throughout the year. Go out and accomplish your goals like on the field with your college team. That a lot of that is going to be built on what you do over these next 3 months. And unfortunately, too many people look at it as like, oh yeah, I'm gonna go lift some weights and do this, that, and the other thing, and I'm gonna gain some body weight, and that'll be that. And we try to get really specific for our guys, really specific on which areas like really need to improve. If there's general areas that need to improve, and as those things continue to progress, the calendars and the programs and the goals have to continue to progress with them as well. So that's all I got for my rant today. I really appreciate you guys checking out this episode. If you guys do anything right these next month or 2 or 3, and you're really looking at, what you want to accomplish next February, March, and April, take these next couple months of us ahead of us very seriously, and understanding what you need to do, the type of strength and capacity goals that you need to have ultimately to get your mechanics and to get your pitches and to get your velocities and, get your sequences all in order. All of that's going to be built on this foundation that you establish over the next 3 months, while the gameplay volume, competitive volume is at its lowest. You've got the most time, the most energy, the most brain space you can dedicate to all that in these next 3 months. Because in December, whether you like it or not, throwing volumes got to increase to get our arm fitness into an area where you can withstand X amount of pitches in your first game. That we've got to start when we've got to start, for that. And then once that happens, a lot of the strength goals start to become very supplemental to what you're doing for skill training. That those things, because of health reasons, can't contradict each other. And the skill training has to start taking the precedence there. So appreciate you guys checking out this episode. Definitely leave me a comment or something down below. I'd like to continue the conversation. If there's any topics within this topic or other topics that made you think of, love to touch on those in future episodes. We'll see you guys next time.